Reform Bill had a huge bipartisan majority. The 21st Century Cures Act had a huge bipartisan majority. Those things are not automatically partisan. But the underlying fight, I mean, everything from the controversies about Russia to the way in which the Senate has held up the nominees and made it harder to run the government, all the way down, you do have a radical difference in how we want America to operate. And it's not personality driven. It's very, very deeply driven by fundamentally different views of the world.
I'm just wondering, though, if it's a radical difference among Republicans, because, you know, you just heard what Mo Brooks told us, Newt. I want to play this soundbite from Congressman Brooks, because he basically blamed it all on the Senate. So what's your take on that, Mr. Speaker, in terms of Mo Brooks saying, look, we passed legislation in the House and it goes to the Senate to die? You know, I know that Chuck Schumer and his Democrats colleagues want to obstruct the agenda. They don't want to see tax reform. They don't want to see a replacement for Obamacare, even though the American people voted for that. It looks like they're winning.
Well, I think they're only winning until the Republicans learn to go to the country. I worked with Reagan on the tax cuts of 1981. I worked with him on a number of other things. He understood, and there's a wonderful small book called The Education of Ronald Reagan, which studies his time at General Electric. And he understood that if he could, as he put it, turn up the light for the American people so they would turn up the heat on Congress, that he could get a lot of stuff done. There are enough Democrats up for re-election next year in the Senate in states that Trump carried, that if the Republicans would organize a serious grassroots campaign, if you go for tax cuts rather than tax reform, if you build a bill that is deficit neutral rather than revenue neutral, you can have so many people in their home states who want that bill that they're not going to be able to stop it. If you build the right kind of bill in terms of infrastructure, you can have so many people back home who want it that they can't stop it. As Obamacare keeps collapsing, when you get some of these states like Missouri, North Dakota, where literally the problems are so great, if we would go out and sell the replacement, then people back home would say to their senators, "You got to vote for this." I mean, I went through this when we passed welfare reform. We split the Democrats evenly. We got 101 yes, 101 no, because back home, people were saying to them at the town hall meetings, "You got to be for welfare reform." So part of this is the Republican Party that isn't selling the issues back home, isn't creating the momentum, and being clear enough about why these things are good for you, not just good for the country, but good for you as a person.
Well, you hit on a lot of important things there. I want to talk about deficit neutral versus revenue neutral. But first, in terms of selling the policy here, Mr. Speaker, this has been the conversation we're having all year, that they can't sell a policy. They can't communicate what they're trying to do. When you're talking about health care, you're talking about people's health care. And in terms of resonating with the American people, in terms of what the bill includes relating to their health care is critical. Are they ever going to be able to sell it? I mean, we're in July almost.
Yeah, look, I can't tell you right now. I mean, as you know, because I was on your show the other day about it, I wrote a book called Understanding Trump, and the whole purpose of the book was to say, look, if we're going to get this thing to work, you've got to start with the fact that he is the president, and what are we going to do now to work with the reality of his strengths and his weaknesses? Well, I would say the same thing to the House and Senate. If you can't write a health bill which people think is better for them, you're not going to be able to pass it in the long run. And frankly, it would be exactly like Obamacare. It'll blow up in your face. And I think the Republicans are not focusing enough on the politics of individuals. I mean, I'll tell you on health, for example. The number one question everybody's going to ask is, what does it do about preconditions? Now, why is that? Not because they're ideologically left or right, but because they know somebody with a precondition.
Right.
And I think you've got to start with where people are and then write the bill. You don't write the bill and then try to go and sell people.
Yeah. Real quick on the revenue neutral versus deficit neutral. You've hit on exactly the issue that they're fighting over. So one part of it is a border adjustment tax. The House has this border adjustment tax in there because they want to raise $1 trillion so that they can be deficit neutral. You say, forget about being deficit neutral, be revenue neutral, or the opposite.
Just the opposite. Right. Here's the problem. If you try to write a revenue neutral bill, all of it has to occur in the tax code. And that means you're in a situation where you've got to raise taxes on somebody in order to cut taxes for somebody else. Well, everybody you raise taxes on gets pissed off. And the people you're cutting taxes on don't believe it because it doesn't happen for a couple of years. So you're in a really dangerous net losing environment politically, even maybe theoretically right. But I'll give you an example. If we were to reform Medicare and Medicaid and go to the same kind of anti-fraud system that American Express, Visa, and MasterCard use, you probably save $100 billion a year. That's $1 trillion over 10 years. If we took the unnecessary federal property, the federal government owns 76,000 buildings. If you took the least important 10,000 of them, you probably could raise a couple $2 billion. Right. If you look at a place like Nevada, where the federal government owns 80% of the state, surely some of that should be available for the private sector. If you do oil and gas and mining rights on federal property, you probably raise at least $0.5 trillion to $1 trillion over 10 years. I mean, all of these things are doable if you have a will to go out. And if it's deficit neutral, you take all of these savings and you can apply it to the tax cut. If it's revenue neutral, none of those savings count. The reason I got to this is in the 19th century, this is how the British continually cut taxes. Because what they said to people is, we're going to be very frugal with the government, but we're going to be generous with your pocketbook. And so every year they cut a little spending and they cut little taxes. And it went on for almost 40 years.
So they'll find that $1 trillion that would have been raised from the border adjustment tax. They'll find it somewhere else if they're deficit neutral.
They could.
We'll be watching that. Mr. Speaker, good to see you. Thanks so much, sir.
Good to see you. Thanks.
Newt Gingrich joining us. The battle over health care reform heats up in Capitol Hill, with GOP lawmakers now pushing for a Senate vote by the end of the month. Will Democrats keep them from striking a deal? Our panel is next on deck as we look ahead right now on Sunday Morning Futures. Welcome back. It is certainly crunch time for health care in the Senate. President Trump and the two top GOP lawmakers pushing to bring a new bill to the floor by the end of the month. I want to bring in our panel right now. Ed Rollins is former White House advisor to President Reagan. He is a Fox News contributor. Mary Kissel is a member of the Wall Street Journal's editorial board. She is host of the Opinion Journal on Wall Street Journal Video. Good to see you both. Thank you so much for joining us. When you sat down, I said, did you see the Mo Brooks interview? Because Congressman Mo Brooks joined us at the top of the show and was not sure about getting the agenda executed. Here's what he just said. I've got to get your reaction to this, both of you. Listen.
The Senate, a majority of the Republicans, has empowered a minority, the Democrats, to block every single thing that we want to get passed, with the exception of one bill a year through a process called budget reconciliation that cannot cover all the issues that need to be covered. And that very much hamstrings us. It's been a frustration point for the House of Representatives during the entire last session of Congress, that 2-year period. And here we are again seeing the same thing unfolding, where the United States Senate is allowing a minority of Democrats to block the will of the president, to block the will of the majority of the House, to block the will of the majority of the Senate, and to block the will of all the American voters who sent us there.
The agenda is #1 priority for the American people. I would just want to point out that we call the head of the Senate, Chuck Schumer, every week to join us on this program so that we could ask him these questions. So far, he has not agreed to join me on this program. We will continue calling him every week for our viewers who want that. Your reaction to Mo Brooks?
I think he's absolutely accurate, unfortunately. I think the minority does get to control the Senate. Schumer now is in a mindset of, we're going to do everything we can to stop Trump and Republicans' agenda. And I think they're going to be able to do that. And it is the minority that rules at this point in time. That's the absurdity of this plan of 60 votes and you need to pass stuff. The Senate has changed dramatically since it was first put into the Constitution, even to the way they selected. There's no reason they can't change the rules again and make it a majority rule.
Mary, what do you think?
Well, I don't think it's ideal to pass massive health care reform through reconciliation. I don't think that anybody wants that. But the reality, the political reality, is that Democrats will not cross the aisle to make compromises was with Republicans. So this is what Republicans are forced into doing. And with respect to the congressman, he's not sitting in the Senate talking and hashing out the deals that need to be made. Look, we already know what the outline of the Senate bill is going to be. They're going to make the House tax credits more generous. They're going to give more power to the states to experiment, slower wind down the Medicaid expansion. They may not give as many, it might not be as aggressive as getting rid of the Obamacare tax cuts as they once thought. This is not a secret. They're working on it. You had Senator Rubio coming on earlier in the show saying that that process is continuing, and let's hope that he's right.
Well, you know, he said the process is continuing, but he said it's a long process. And so I'm just wondering if they're going to be able to get this done in 2017.
I'm not sure they are, and equally as important, I think it's a flawed process. It's exactly what the Democrats did last time. There's no public hearing. There's no committee hearings. Historically, the way bills are passed is they go to committees, you have open hearings, you basically come up with a bill after those hearings, and you basically put it to the floor. They're attempting behind closed doors to draft a bill and shove it through that no one's going to know what it is, and trying to amend it on the floor of the Senate. And I think at the end of the day, this bill is very unpopular with the American public, and the president and the Congress has to go sell it.
It's exactly what they did with Obamacare, by the way.
Well, I don't know if it's exactly what they did with Obamacare.
It's behind secret doors. We don't know what's in it. We still don't know what's in it.
That's the talking point of the left. Come on. You had Paul Ryan with the Better Way plan give us the outline of this bill. You have had Republicans working for years on the various aspects. You just have a disagreement within the caucus because you had some states take the Medicaid expansion and other states who didn't, and now they're trying to come to a compromise. And you're seeing that with Governor Kasich of Ohio saying, you know what, maybe we can wind down that expansion. Let's just do it over a longer period of time. They're going to have those committee hearings. And look, they're not going to pass this bill on Christmas Eve like Harry Reid did with Obamacare. I just don't think that's an apples-to-apples comparison.
Sounds like you're a little more optimistic they'll get it done.
There's a big difference, though. The Democrats had 60 votes, which were sufficient to pass in the Senate, and they had about 25 more House members than we have today. We basically have a very narrow shot. Any two senators going south on us in this particular bill, it's dead and gone.
Yeah, they need every vote.
They need every single vote. And now with the tragedy of Scalisi's injury this week, I don't think we have enough votes to pass it in the House.
But there's more political pressure to pass it because the exchanges are falling apart. They're deteriorating. So Republicans are going to have to pass something. They're either going to pass the reform, repeal and replace reform that they want, or they're going to have to pass a bill to shore up Obamacare because the pressure from the public will be simply too great. Yeah. Not to mention the pressure of next year's elections, which I think is starting to exert more influence over the caucus.
I would rather take a little bit more time and do it well and let this be a bill that can be fixed in the future and move forward than pass a bad bill that becomes the Republican bill that ends up being worse than Obamacare.
And that's what Marco Rubio said. We'll take a short break. When we come back, more with our panel right here. Stay with us. We're back with Ed Rollins, Mary Kissel, and one of the reasons that the agenda has been stalled is because of this noise of the Russia probe that has been unending since the president took office. Mary, where are you on Robert Mueller right now, special counsel? Give me your thoughts.
Well, first of all, this is starting to look like a witch hunt, I think. We know that President Trump was not under investigation by the FBI. We know that he did not ask the FBI director, or rather order him, to drop an investigation, and we know that it was well within the president's rights to dismiss the FBI director. He has that power as president. We gave that power to the president after the abuses of J. Edgar Hoover. So what exactly is Mueller investigating here?
Well, we moved from investigating whether Russians were involved in our election, which they were, to basically investigating the president. And this president is terribly distracted by all of this, as he should be. It's unfair. And I think the reality is you got four big posts in the cabinet: Treasury, State, Attorney General, and Defense. And now we don't have a political leadership in the Attorney General. We need a new Attorney General. And I'd have great respect for Sessions. What I would do if I was running the White House is I'd ask him to resign, and I'd make him the counselor to the president, let him come to the White House and advise the president on how to deal with the Congress and how to deal with the Justice Department, and he's free of all this stuff.
Wow.
Put someone in who had nothing to do with the campaign who could run that department.
Wouldn't that be a huge blow to ask Jeff Sessions to resign, Ed?
Well, the bottom line is he's going to be ineffective all the way through here. And I think if you rewarded him, if you just asked him to resign or cripple him as he is today, then I think to a certain extent he can't lead the department effectively. Make him a counselor to the president, which is cabinet rank, and let him basically advise his president.
I don't know why he recused himself in the beginning.
He shouldn't have.
Yeah.
And the reality is we've gone for 3 or 4 months where he looked like he was cohorts with the Russians, and clearly he wasn't in his defense. And I think it's absurd at this point.
That's a big statement.
I mean,
Mary, what do you think?
Look, the alternative is that you just let the special counsel go off and do his investigation and start focusing more on getting big achievements done in Congress rather than defending your honor through Twitter. Now, I understand why the president is upset. I would be upset, too, given what we learned from the Jim Comey hearing, not to mention the fact that he was leaking. And if he felt that he had was given an incorrect order by the president or inappropriate order, he should have stepped forward at that time. So,
and not be a leaker. And how about Loretta Lynch being an obstructionist? She obstructed justice, telling him to call it a matter, not an investigation. Where's that investigation?
You need the administration to be disciplined, and it simply is not. The American people did not focus, for instance, on the big financial market reform that Congress passed. They're not focusing on the Cuba announcement.
That's a good point. Real quick.
I have great respect for Sessions. Sessions just can't do the job at this point in time, and you need to basically put someone in who can do the job.
Great panel. Have a great day. See you on Monday. Fox Business Network, everybody. Happy Father's Day.